Welcome to Shooting Straight with Brad and David. I'm Brad Carline, your Navajo County Attorney.
I'm David Klaus, your Navajo County Sheriff.
And our guest this month is Andrew LeFevre with the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission. Andy, thanks for joining us.
Glad to make the trip out of the mountain, out of the heat today.
There's probably a lot of people who don't really know or even heard of the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission. I know when I first became county attorney, I hadn't heard of it. What is it?
I'm going to just say ACJC. That's a lot less of a mouthful than the Criminal Justice Commission. But ACJC was created by the legislature in 1982 to serve as kind of a broad policy and coordinating entity for the state for criminal justice issues. So we have 19 commission members that serve on the commission. 5 of them are agency heads, so Department of Public Safety, the corrections, the courts, Attorney General, and the Board of Executive Clemency, and then 14 other members that are appointed by the governor. So we have 3 county attorneys, 3 sheriffs, 3 chiefs of police, a mayor, county administrator, a retired judge, and a partridge in a pear tree is what it seems like sometimes. But those members that come together and serve on the commission, represent all levels of government in Arizona, so cities, counties, and the state. All dealing with some aspect of the criminal justice system. We meet about 6 times throughout the year as a body, talk about policy issues that are going on for the state, talk about how we can bring resources into the state from a criminal justice standpoint. So that's really one of our main functions, is to serve as that conduit for federal criminal justice dollars that come into Arizona. They flow through ACJC, and then we grant those out into the localities to do a lot of different kinds of activities which both of your offices participate in.
It's kind of a highfalutin description of what you gave. On brass tacks, down at the level of the sheriff and I, how does it impact us? Well, how does it impact our citizens?
Yeah, I mean, really what the best way I can say we do that is, we look for problems in the criminal justice system, where things are not working well, where systems are not talking well together, and we try and find resources to make it better. And then we go find them, or we get them from either the feds or the state, and then we give them to you all to do the job and make your jobs more effective or more efficient. So, whether it's funding drug task forces or funding prosecutor positions in your office to prosecute those kinds of drug crimes, funding crime labs, looking at ways we can make sure that your record system is going to talk to the sheriff's record system, not only in your county but down in other counties. I think the citizens would be surprised how paper-based most of it still is, and a lot of what we do is try and find ways to make sure that people are not slipping through the cracks. People have accurate criminal histories so that they are records of their crimes, so that if they want to go get a job in a hospital, we know if they should be able to get a job in a hospital.
So you mentioned there's 15 members on this commission?
There's 19 total.
19. How often do you guys meet, and what are some of the things that you would discuss in a typical commission meeting?
We typically meet 6 times a year as the full body, and then as committees as needed in between. And typically we have our discussions around our major program areas. So our drug, gang, and violent crime control area is the area you're probably most familiar with. That's funding those drug task forces and those prosecution efforts. We have a victim services area. We run the state's victim compensation program, which provides direct payments to victims for the cost of that victimization if they have no other way to pay for that. So if they've been a victim of a crime and their insurance has run out, or they've utilized all of that, then the victim comp program can step in and help cover mental health costs or hospital costs, things like that. We run those programs through each of the county attorney's office, so that's run through Brad's office here in Mojave County, or Navajo County, sorry. We have a statistical analysis center in my shop, so obviously we are required to collect and do a bunch of different reports for the state and for the feds, so oftentimes our commission is reviewing those and kind of approving the final drafts of those. Our criminal justice systems improvement area is probably one of our more active ones. So we are constantly talking about how we improve things. The biggest thing we've done lately is the creation of the new AZ point system, which is the way that citizens interact with the protective order process. It was very paper-based, the old system. If a judge granted an order, he would hand a piece of paper back to that person, and they had to figure out how do they navigate which law enforcement entity or agency should be serving the order, how they do all that. That's now all computerized.
So how did you guys change that? And how does it work now with what you've done?
Yeah, so the new system is computer-based. So anybody who would like to seek that protection from the court can go online and create an informational packet on the computer that gets stored in a queue. Once they decide they want to go before a judge, they can go now to any court in the state. The judge that's overseeing orders that day can pull all that information down, review it, decide if they're going to grant the order. If they grant the order, it's automatically transmitted based on the information that's provided to what they feel is the most appropriate law enforcement entity to serve it. Once the entity serves the order, it's automatically put back into that system and transferred to NCIC, so it's enforceable.
NCIC is?
National Crime Information Center. It's the national database of orders and warrants and stuff so that other law enforcement agencies can see it. The change that's been made by doing that process, it used to take an average of 23 days from the time a judge would grant an order until it was in NCIC and enforceable before the new system came online. Preliminary data showing that we've now gotten that under 7 days.
Have you seen an impact from that, David?
Yeah, and I'd say going back to the legibility of the document, you talked about the paper-based, right? Some of these were hand-filled out by the plaintiff or the one seeking it, and hard to read, hard to see the language that was written in, why it was described. And so an officer or deputy seeing it, it's hard to see that language. Now it's electronic. And second, talking about the service of it, is the turnaround time, and it has to be entered in NCIC, because if it's not into that system, then when we make contact with somebody out in the field and they're waving a piece of paper, if they're saying that, if it's not in the system, it's not enforceable, much like Andy was talking about. And I think there's a lot of these lags because it was seen before a judge on a Monday, it was assigned, but it hadn't been served, and then Tuesday morning, somebody's trying to, ask law enforcement to enforce something on it, and it's just like we're in that gray part, and I think we're getting that crunch down.
So besides helping to create this process, Andy, are you guys monitoring it at ACJC and seeing how it can be improved to maybe even reduced from that 7 days?
So the system resides at the courts. The courts
Okay.
are the ones that house that system. But yeah, we have a working group that meets regularly, interacting with law enforcement to see if there's things we can change about the way they interact with the system. We want it to be as user-friendly as possible for all the parties that need to participate in that system. And we're going to keep looking at it. The one area that we didn't get to address is that incidental contact of what happens if you pull somebody over on the side of the road and there's an active order for them. Can you serve that order on them? We have the system built to do that, but a lot of officers don't have the necessary printers and things in their cars to be able to serve an order. So I think that may be the next step for us, and that would be a great way to improve the amount of orders that we're able to serve in that timely manner.
He says it's already built into the system and it's just waiting for the on-the-ground technology to catch up to.
Yeah, a lot of times we build the system to anticipate future needs, and we're just kind of waiting for technology to catch up with the thought of how we improve something. So that to me has been one of the biggest changes we've made here as a state over the last 5 years that I think has definitely brought an improvement to our citizens' lives. Because that's if you're somebody who's seeking that protection from the court, there's a real reason you're seeking it. You can't have 23 days go by before it's enforceable. That's just a danger point for folks in domestic violence situations.
Were you seeing a lot of that in Maricopa County for that big number? Because I know we weren't 23 days in the smaller part of the state, but
I don't know where the numbers came from, county by county. I just know that the 7 days is kind of the window now. I think most of them are actually being entered within like 3 to 4.
Yeah.
So it's technology is great, and it's just it was training law enforcement how to use the system. It was training the victim advocates on making sure folks were aware of this new way they could interact with it, and then just kind of continuing to work to get the word out. I
know one of the areas the legislature has really been looking at the last couple years as criminal justice reform, and part of what they seem to want to help them move forward with some of their ideas or justify them is more data. And the legislatures, 2 years ago, required Yavapai and Pinal to start submitting data to your office, then expanded that by 3 more counties this past year. Mm-hmm. What kind of data are they asking you to collect, and what do you do with that data?
Well, that's data is an interesting thing. If I could snap my fingers today and get all the data, I would, because to make good policy decisions, you really should have that data. It should be based on data. The issue that we deal with in Arizona is there's so many different systems that are across all these different agencies that one of the things we did this last session was work with the legislature to actually say, before we start just saying report something, we should really probably understand what's being collected by agencies. So we're in the process of doing a system-wide scan of all criminal justice agencies to better understand what criminal justice data they're collecting and what's consistent across agencies, so that we can go back to the legislature with a more comprehensive plan of saying, if you want to report data, this would be the data we would recommend you collect and report. Because it's probably the data that's going to be most useful to lead those policy kinds of conversations. I don't think anybody doesn't want to report data. I think people want to be transparent with what's going on in their agencies. I know in speaking with both Yavapai and Pinal County, once they kind of built their systems to do that reporting of data, they both found it extremely useful. It's helped answer questions that citizens have of their offices. So I would anticipate as we go down this road, we'll see similar processes put in place for all these other agencies. But we don't want it to be overburdensome. We don't want to report colors of sneakers or things like that really aren't going to be helpful to policy conversations. But we want to make sure that the data that is available is useful data and consistent data across the agencies. And then we can go back to the legislature and talk about what it's going to cost to actually put a system in place to do that.
Do you hope to do that by the next session, or is this a longer-term plan?
The bill that was passed requires us to report to the legislature by August of 22. The results of our survey. We'll have a conversation that fall, and then I would anticipate that we would have a conversation in that 23 legislative session about what data they would want to collect and report. I'm hoping to be able to kind of price it out for them by this session so they can get a general sense for what we think it'll cost, because that way hopefully they can maybe approve some funding to start it off and not have to wait till a year after the next session to do it.
I appreciate your comment of talking about what it takes to get that data and what it takes to report it and how much it's going to cost, because you reach out to many of our offices throughout the year and just kind of send out little feelers for different information, and these things do come at a cost, don't they? Mm-hmm. These new mandates or these new laws and these new rules come at a cost to a lot of these smaller agencies and the larger agencies as well, because it takes deputies off the road, or it takes prosecutors out of the courtroom to help build these types of systems and report that data. But there is value.
Yeah, most definitely. And my vision of building something would be that it would be as automatic as possible, so that it would not require somebody to do something above and beyond what they're already doing. If an officer's entering the information into your RMS or your system, or your tracking, your case management system, they shouldn't have to enter it again into a different system. We should be able to go in today's technology age and be able to get it out of the system automatically.
And I believe both Pinal and Yavapai have the same prosecutor database system. So are they able to just download it to you now, or do they send it to you in some other format?
Actually, they're not sending it to us right now. They're just hosting it on their own web services. But it's a good example of what I think it would potentially look like at a state system. So we've taken the data that we currently house at ACJC, and we've created some visual data dashboards to kind of give a sense for the other ways that you could look at data. So all of the funding that we provide through our EDGE funding, so our enhanced drug and gang funding that funds your task forces and your prosecution efforts, is all up on our website. You can go on there and see data for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years now that show, seizures and prosecutions and crime lab activity and all of that, because to me that's the kind of public-facing data that is helpful in making those policy decisions.
Can you track how many people actually access that data?
Not as many as I'd like yet, but we're still relatively new with getting it up there.
So you can track that people see it.
Yeah. So again, I mean, the great thing about the webs and services is that you can get all that metadata out of the back end. So, look, there's not a great history of the legislature asking for certain things and then not really looking at it. So I could say that we have a couple of reports now that I don't know how often they're looked at, but we're required to do them so that we do. But I'm hopeful that if we create something that's much more easily usable by the public, so it's not just a static report, but it's something where they can go in and they can choose things that they want to see in the way that looks, that will have more folks look at it and use it on a regular basis.
So you envision having them be able to pull whatever fields they think is important and see if there's any interrelationships or whatever they may be looking at it.
Yeah, ultimately, if we build this the way that we would envision it, everything would be public facing and available for folks to download that data and do what they want with it. I would view then our job at ACJC to try and answer specific questions that we get from the legislature about the data. Tell me if we're going to make a policy change and we're going to change earned release time from X to Y, what is that going to do to the prison population? We could run those and put that together for them. But we want researchers at universities, we want citizens to be able to get in and take a look at the data and try and use it themselves, because ultimately I think all that does is, or all it should do, it would be create more confidence in what agencies are doing, because the data is available for folks to look at.
Yeah, and I think that there is a big interest across the state, and there's a lot of interest of all this investment into criminal justice. And
it's a pricey part of our budgets is criminal justice. Other states doing this, or are we kind of taking the lead again in Arizona? We seem to do a lot of leading in criminal justice.
I think if we do this the way that I envision it, I think we would be the national leader in how we're going to collect and report data. I mean, there's a lot of states that are collecting and reporting stuff. I have a colleague in Maryland that has 40 separate reports that he has to produce on a yearly basis that are standalone reports that really don't talk to each other and are hard to try and figure out what they all mean.
I'm not even sure if they're all read.
And probably not too sure if too many folks are looking at them. But so, I mean, I don't want to do that. If we're going to do this endeavor and we're going to put the time and energy and we're going to put the resources behind doing it, I want to do it so that it really is something that can be useful to not only our policymakers, but our citizens.
I think that's important, making good decisions going forward based off of what we're collecting. But switching gears a little bit, you keep talking about funding task forces within different counties. I know us here in Navajo County work directly with ACJC every year to apply for those grants. For our task force, tell us a little bit about the task force funding that ACJC is a big part of.
Yeah, we get federal dollars every year that come through the Byrne Justice Assistance Grant Program. So that's the big federal criminal justice grant that we use in conjunction with state dollars. So we have Arizona has fines and fees on drug crimes, so that all kind of goes into a pot, and then we use that pot of money to fund a lot of different activities around reducing violent crime and drug crime. So our big kind of frontline things would be our drug task forces that we have in, I think, every county, but Maricopa County has a funded drug task force. And that's usually paying for overtime of officers from various agencies to kind of come together and serve on these drug task forces. So again, if an officer is pulling over somebody in Sholo and he's just the local police guy, they'll probably call in the drug task force if they think there's drug activity going on to help with that investigation. We use those funds to fund prosecutors at the county attorney's offices that are primarily focused on prosecuting drug crime. We fund crime labs to fund the activities to process the drug samples that are taken and provide that information back to you all. So that has been super impactful, and I think in Arizona over the last probably 30 years we've been doing that work because it is an addition to the normal activities of what's going on in the sheriff or the chief's office, to help them, do that work that probably wouldn't get done or wouldn't get done nearly to the same level if those resources weren't being provided.
I think you're exactly right. A little more proactive. Brad's able to assign prosecutors to those cases because we're generating more. We're going above and beyond our regular calls for service and creating more calls for service by being more proactive.
And we're helping the communities by getting those drug houses out, the sellers out. The quality of life goes up with it. So it gives you and the other local agencies the ability to target local dealers.
Yeah, just speaking with our agency, our general funds allow us just to meet the needs of our calls for service and our everyday responsibilities that come with that. That Burn Jag grant that we apply for allows for that overtime. We get that special funding not only through there but through HIDA, and we're much more proactive in this county. And our viewers may, another acronym in law enforcement, if you believe that, is MCAT. It's Major Crimes Apprehension Team. That's the name of our task force. And they've been very, very productive the last decade in targeting repeat offenders and targeting these traffickers within this county.
What other projects are coming up on the horizon for ACJC? You talked about the database, but there's got to be more.
Yeah, so one of the big things we're working on right now is we received a grant from the Federal Victims of Crime Office to bring a statewide victim notification system into Arizona. We want to provide some additional resources to the sheriff for those folks that are entering and leaving jails. Victims have a right in Arizona to be notified when there's a change in custody status. So trying to provide some technology solutions to those offices and to the Department of Corrections to make that process easier for them to notify victims of crime of that. And then, very excited, it should be being announced today, actually. The governor's office is going to provide some additional funding for our victims' compensation activities over the next, this year. So $1.2 million, which is much needed in our state to make sure that we can help meet the needs of those victims of crime and make sure that we help make them whole again as much as possible.
Currently, how do the victim compensation funds get raised?
Right now, the main funding source is from a special assessment on civil traffic tickets for criminal penalties and things like that. Most of our activities that we fund come through those special assessments, which is not a great stable funding base for those kinds of activities. So I think we're going to have a real serious conversation over the next couple of months, next legislative session, about how we might possibly change criminal justice funding in Arizona to find something that is more stable and will help bring additional resources down to the county and the city level.
Because those compensation funds just help cover economic loss that the victim may otherwise have to bear on their own. About how much annually is raised for the compensation fund, if you know?
I think we spend on average between what the state dollars are and what we're able to be reimbursed from the federal compensation fund, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $3.5 million in program cost. I know we help cover some administrative costs to the counties for the work that they do. We took a look and did an analysis of those kinds of crimes that are most associated with having a victim that would apply to the victim compensation program. And the dollar figure we came up with from a very conservative estimate is probably closer to the neighborhood of about $10 million. So there's clearly a greater need for funding because all of our decisions are based on what we know we have coming in. So we don't do a lot of outreach to try and identify more victims that could benefit from the program because we just know we don't have the funds to serve them right now.
Yeah, and I know that the Navajo County Victim Compensation Fund can't come close to paying all the claims that come in, and it makes them for some very difficult decisions for them.
Yeah, one of the things I think we're going to look at doing, there was just a change at the federal level that's going to increase slightly the amount that we can be reimbursed out of the federal compensation fund. I think it's right now we get reimbursed every 2 years behind at 60% what we spent of the state dollars. I think it's going to be 75% now. So it's a little more money, but one of the things we've talked about doing is bringing back onto staff. We had a position years ago, a restitution specialist, that I think would work with the counties on how we can help you all do a better job of seeking restitution at the county level for those folks that are going through. Make sure we can track it, make sure folks are paying it. You know, restitution is what a person who committed the crime is due to pay back to the victim of the crime. You know, so we want to make sure that they're paying that victim back as best they can, because that all just goes into the amount of funding that's available for those victims of crime. And those folks are at their most vulnerable point when that happens, and it's a shame that we can't do more for some of them.
Yeah, they get victimized twice almost.
Yes.
Well, I think we're out of time, but we appreciate you joining us and traveling. ACJC is an important function of the criminal justice system in Arizona, and I don't think a lot of viewers know about it and the work that you do to help support Navajo County. And we appreciate you being our guest today.
I appreciate being able to be here, and if people want to learn more, they can go to our website. It's azcjc.gov, and they can read all about all the work that we do.
And start looking at all that data.
And the data's there under Data Visualization Center. So yeah, please check it out.
And thank you for joining us this month for Shooting Straight with Brad and David, and please stay tuned for this month's Most Wanted.
Balin Cody Franklin Mahoney has multiple warrants issued for his arrest. Balin's last known address was Snowflake, Arizona. Please do not approach him. Balin is known to be violent. If you know of his whereabouts, Navajo County Sheriff's Office strongly encourages you to call Navajo County Communications Center at 928-524-4050, or to remain anonymous, please call WeTip at 1-800-78-CRIME.